My name is Delia Harmon, and I'm 33 years old. 5 years ago, my sister told my parents I had been expelled from my engineering program for cheating. She fabricated evidence. She sent fake screenshots. She made them believe their younger daughter was a fraud and a liar. They believed her without a single question. They changed the locks, they removed me from the family bank account, they skipped my graduate school graduation. And when I got married in a small ceremony in Austin, Texas, the only family member present was my father's estranged brother, a man my parents hadn't spoken to in a decade. For 5 years, I was no one's daughter. Then, last month, my sister collapsed at her kitchen table. Massive stroke. She was airlifted to St. Caldwell Medical Center in Dallas, the best neurological trauma facility in the region. The hospital's chief of neuroengineering was paged immediately. When my mother rushed through those sliding glass doors, demanding to speak to whoever was running point on her daughter's case, the attending nurse led her down the corridor and pointed through a glass partition. My mother looked at the woman in the white coat standing over the imaging console, looked at the name badge on her chest, and grabbed the wall with both hands to keep herself from falling. Before we go any further, if you've ever been erased by your own family because someone else's lie was louder than your truth, drop a comment below and subscribe, because I promise you this goes somewhere none of us expected. Let me take you back. Back to Beaumont, Texas. Back to a split-level house on Crescent Drive, where two sisters grew up under the same roof and lived in completely different worlds. My sister Cassandra, Cassie, is 4 years older than me. Our parents, Roy and Vivian Harmon, were good people, in the way that a lot of people are good. Kind when things were easy, fragile when things got hard. Dad managed a regional distribution center. Mom taught elementary school for 22 years. They were hardworking, proud, and deeply invested in how things looked from the outside. Cassie understood that instinctively. Charming, polished, socially fluent in a way I never was. Volleyball, yearbook, most likely to succeed 3 years running. She had the gift of making adults feel like she was letting them in on a secret. I was the one in the corner with graph paper and mechanical pencils, building things. I won a regional robotics competition in 7th grade. Our whole school got a mention in the local paper. I came home and showed my dad the article. He read it, patted my shoulder, and said, "That's something, Dee." He wasn't dismissive, he just genuinely didn't have the language for what I was doing. Cassie always had a volleyball tournament that weekend. I told myself it was fine. I poured everything into my academics, into my projects, into the kind of focused ambition that looks like you don't need anyone's approval. But I needed it. I needed it more than I ever said out loud. And for one brief, shining season, I was right to keep trying. The acceptance letter arrived in a February afternoon during my senior year. Full scholarship to the Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering program at the University of Texas at Austin. Full ride, research stipend, honors track. Cassie was visiting that weekend. She was 22, working at a PR firm in Houston, doing fine by any reasonable measure. Dad read the letter twice. Then he looked at me over his reading glasses with an expression I had never seen from him before. Something real and slightly stunned. Aerospace engineering, full scholarship. Mom called her sister in San Antonio that night. She called the neighbor across the street. She called the principal of the school where she taught, even though it was 8 o'clock at night. Delia got into UT on a full scholarship. The engineering program, can you imagine? Real pride, the kind I had spent 18 years waiting for. I made the mistake of looking across the dinner table at Cassie. She was smiling, but it was a smile that lived entirely in the lower half of her face. Her eyes were doing something quick and quiet, like someone rearranging furniture in a room you weren't supposed to see. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was about to. Over the next few weeks, Cassie started calling more, 2, 3 times a week, asking about my classes, my professors, which labs I was hoping to work in. Warm, interested, sisterly in a way she had never quite managed before. I thought I had finally impressed her. I was actually writing her a manual. Junior year is where the real pressure builds. The coursework compounds, the research commitments intensify. I was doing well, genuinely well. My advisor, Dr. Priya Anand, had flagged me for an accelerated graduate track. I was co-authoring a paper. I was sleeping 4 hours a night and loving every second of it. Then, my lab partner and closest friend, Marcus Webb, was in a car accident. Marcus had grown up in the foster system, made it to UT on grants and sheer grinding will. He had no one. When the accident left him with a spinal injury requiring surgery and 6 weeks of intensive physical therapy, there was nobody to help him navigate the aftermath. I went to Dr. Anand and explained the situation. She helped me file a formal leave of absence, 1 semester, fully documented. My spot on the graduate track was protected. I would return in the fall. I called Cassie to tell her. I'm still not sure why. Maybe I thought honesty was a form of trust. She was sympathetic, warm, full of the right words. Dee, that's so like you. Don't worry about a thing. I won't breathe a word to mom and dad. You know how they worry. 4 days later, she called our parents. I was sitting in the rehab center waiting room, waiting for Marcus, helping him review his insurance claim, when my phone lit up. Dad. His voice was flat, cold, a voice I had never heard from him before. Your sister told us everything, Delia. The cheating accusation, the academic board, the scholarship suspension, all of it. My stomach dropped so fast I put my hand on the chair arm to steady myself. Dad, none of that is true. I'm on an approved leave of absence. Dr. Anand signed off on it. I can send you the paperwork right now. Cassie showed us the emails from the Academic Integrity Office. Those emails don't exist, Dad. There is no academic integrity case. I was never accused of anything. Then why would your sister lie about something like this? And there it was, the question that assumed its own answer. Mom got on the line. How could you throw away a full scholarship and say nothing? Mom, I'm sitting in a physical therapy center helping my friend. I filed paperwork. I have documentation. Call Dr. Anand. Call the registrar. The number is on the university website. Cassandra said you'd have a story. Then Dad, don't call this house until you're ready to be honest with us. We didn't raise a cheater. The call ended. I sat in that waiting room for a long time. The television in the corner was playing a home renovation show with the sound off. Marcus wheeled out from his session, took one look at my face, and said, "What happened?" I showed him the call log. 22 minutes. That's how long it took my family to decide I was someone else entirely. Marcus recovered. Fully, eventually. He finished his degree and took a job at an aerospace firm in Houston. We still text every week. I went back to UT in the fall. No family support, no safety net. My scholarship was intact because I had done everything correctly, but the emotional scaffolding was gone. I worked the way you work when there's nothing else. When the grief of being erased by your own parents either swallows you whole or gets converted, through some alchemy you don't fully understand, into fuel. I graduated with highest honors. Nobody from Beaumont came. I was accepted into a doctoral program in neuroengineering at UT Southwestern. My research focused on surgical robotics applied to neurological procedures, systems that could be used in minimally invasive brain and spine surgeries. It was the kind of work that takes a decade to matter. I was willing to wait. It was during my second year of graduate school that I met Dr. Raymond Osai, 54 years old, a pioneer in surgical robotics, who had spent 20 years building the program at St. Caldwell Medical Center in Dallas, the most demanding mentor I have ever encountered, and the closest thing to a professional father I have ever had. He saw my work at a conference and tracked me down at the reception. "Your paper has a flaw in the haptic feedback loop," he said by way of introduction. "But the underlying framework is the most interesting thing I've seen from a doctoral candidate in 6 years." I looked at him. "What's the flaw?" He smiled. That was apparently the right answer. I finished my doctorate under his supervision. Then I joined St. Caldwell. Then I became the program's lead engineer. Then, 3 years ago, I was appointed Chief of Neuroengineering Technology, overseeing a surgical robotics suite that had rewritten the standards in the field. Somewhere in between all of that, I got married. His name is Jerome Achebe. He was a high school physics teacher when I met him at a STEM education fundraiser. Steady, warm, the kind of man who listens with his whole face. I told him my whole story on our third date, laid it out plainly, no softening. He sat quietly through all of it. Then he said, "You deserved better than that, and you built it anyway. That tells me everything I need to know about you." We got married in Austin in October. 30 guests. Uncle Garrett walked me down the aisle. I sent an invitation to Beaumont. It came back without being opened. I recognized the handwriting. 5 years passed. I became someone my parents wouldn't recognize. Uncle Garrett called every few weeks. He never pushed, but he listened and volunteered things when he thought I needed to hear them. Mom and Dad were fine, healthy, retired. Cassie had left the PR firm, gotten married, gotten divorced, and was now working in medical device sales. She covered the Dallas-Fort Worth territory. The geography of that irony was not something I spent time dwelling on. About a month ago, Garrett called on a Tuesday evening while I was reviewing a post-procedure imaging report. "Dee, I need to tell you something about Cassie, something that's been worrying me." His voice was careful, layered. My hospital pager went off before he could finish. Critical neuroactivation, hemorrhagic stroke, female patient, 41, airlifted inbound, 15 minutes out. I told Garrett I'd call back. I never had the chance because what Garrett was trying to tell me was already in an ambulance at 40 feet per second. The call came through dispatch at 9:47 p.m. I pulled up the incoming patient data on the corridor tablet as I walked toward the neurotrauma suite. Patient name, Cassandra Harmon Delvaux. Emergency contact, Roy Harmon, father. I stopped in the middle of the corridor. Patricia, a nurse who has worked beside me for 3 years and reads me better than most people, appeared at my elbow without a word. I looked up from the tablet. "Get the robotic console prepped and page Dr. Osei. I want him on standby." "You okay, Dr. Harmon?" "I'm fine. Let's move." The stretcher came through fast. Cassie was unconscious, oxygen mask over her face, vitals showing the specific profile of a massive hemorrhagic event on the left side. She was losing time every second she wasn't on the table. She looked smaller than I remembered. Behind the stretcher came my parents. Mom was in a jacket thrown over pajamas, hair loose, uncombed, the way it gets when you're pulled from deep sleep by the worst kind of phone call. She was already crying silently before the full reality of the situation had even landed. Dad was gray, not just his face, his entire posture. The squared-off confidence I had watched him carry my whole life was simply gone. He was a frightened father in a hospital hallway and nothing else. "That's my daughter," he said to the triage nurse. "I need to speak to whoever is running this." Curtis, the triage nurse, 15 years on this floor, glanced through the glass partition toward the prepped area where I was pulling on my surgical gown. He looked at my badge. Something shifted behind his eyes. He turned back to my father. "Sir, the chief is preparing for the procedure. Please come this way." My parents were led down the hall, Mom whispering, Dad turning back, scanning every face, every window. "She's the only one we have left," he said, to no one and everyone. I heard it through the partition glass, every word. I went to the scrub sink alone, stood there for 45 seconds. My reflection looked back from the steel mirror, scrub cap half on, badge hanging on my gown. I thought about the letter that came back unopened. I thought about 14 phone calls going nowhere. I thought about Jerome's father walking me down an October aisle while 2 chairs in the back row sat empty. Part of me thought, "Page Dr. Osei, let him take it. Let someone else carry this." But there was a woman on that table with a hemorrhagic stroke expanding by the minute. The procedure she needed had been performed at this facility 206 times. I had been present for every single one. I was the best person in that building to save Cassie's life. That was simply a fact. I paged Dr. Osei directly. "Raymond, I have a conflict of interest. The patient is my sister. I'm disclosing it formally right now. If at any point my judgment is in question, you take over immediately. Understood, Delia. I'll be in the observation suite. Everything documented, everything above board, every decision traceable. Then I walked in. 4 hours and 18 minutes. That is how long it took to stop the bleed, repair the vessel wall, relieve the intracranial pressure, and give my sister's brain a fighting chance at full function. I don't speak during procedures unless necessary. The suite runs on economy of movement, economy of language. Suction, hold, advance 2 millimeters, confirm imaging, proceed. Dr. Osei arrived during the second hour and stood silently in the observation area, watching the way he watches when the work gets difficult, not to intervene, but to bear witness. I did not falter. At 2:13 in the morning, I stepped back from the console. Cassie's vitals were stable, pressure normalized, no secondary bleed. She was alive. Patricia pulled off her gloves and looked at me. Dr. Harmon, that was extraordinary. Dr. Osei appeared in the doorway. He looked at me for a long moment, then, quietly, "Do you want me to talk to the family?" I washed my hands, methodical, the same way I have done it 10,000 times. "No," I said. "This one is mine." My parents were the only people in the consultation room. Dad standing, he always stands when he's anxious. Mom sitting, with her hands folded so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. I pushed through the door, still in my surgical scrubs, badge on my chest, visible, printed clearly. Dr. Delia Harmon, Chief of Neuroengineering Technology, St. Caldwell Medical Center. Dad turned toward me before I fully cleared the doorway. "Doctor, please, how is she? Is Cassandra—" He stopped. His eyes dropped to my badge, then moved to my face, then back to the badge. I watched the recognition move through him the way seismic activity moves through a building, starting somewhere in his chest and radiating outward. His hands, which had been reaching toward me, stilled in midair. Mom looked up a half-second later. Her lips parted. No sound came out. I spoke first, the same voice I use with every family in this room. Level, clear, clinical. "Mr. and Mrs. Harmon, I'm Dr. Harmon, Chief of Neuroengineering Technology. Your daughter, Cassandra, experienced a hemorrhagic stroke from a ruptured cerebral aneurysm. We performed a 4-hour procedure to stop the bleed and repair the vessel. She is stable. She's in the neurological ICU. You'll be able to see her within 2 hours. Mr. and Mrs. Harmon, not Mom and Dad." I watched that land. I watched it cut. My mother stood and reached toward me, arms lifting, a sob already breaking through. "Delia!" I stepped back, half a step, polite, unmistakable. She froze. Her hands hung in the air between us, then slowly dropped to her sides. Dad's voice came out like something dragged over gravel. "You're a doctor?" "I am." "The chief?" "I have been for 3 years." "But Cassie said, she told us—" He closed his mouth, opened it, closed it again, the machinery of his mind trying to reassemble 5 years of certainty that was crumbling in real time. "She told you I was expelled," I said. My voice was level, no shaking, no tears. That my scholarship was revoked, that I had fabricated everything. I kept my eyes steady on his. None of it was true, not one word. Mom was crying now, not quietly. Mascara gone, hands shaking. "We thought you dropped out. We thought—" I filed a leave of absence with full documentation. I sent you the paperwork. I called 14 times. I wrote a letter you returned without opening. I wasn't accusing. I was reciting. Facts don't need volume. Dad tried to redirect, old instinct. "This isn't the time or place, Delia." "I know exactly where we are, Dad. I just spent 4 hours and 18 minutes making sure your daughter survives." He had nothing. For the first time in my life, my father had absolutely nothing. Mom reached for the back of a chair to steady herself. "The letters! You said you sent letters." 2 emails, 1 handwritten letter. You sent it back unopened. I recognized your handwriting on the envelope." She pressed her fist against her mouth. Patricia appeared at the door, hospital business, routine, and mentioned the Physician of Excellence nomination confirmation in passing, with no idea she had just detonated a second bomb. Mom looked at me, eyes swollen, bathrobe still on. Physician of Excellence. I turned to Patricia. "Thank you. I need to check post-op vitals." I walked toward the ICU corridor, measured steps, spine straight. I did not look back, but I heard my mother's voice behind me, small and completely undone. "Roy, what have we done?" And my father said nothing, because silence, for the first time in his life, was the only honest thing he had left. Let me tell you what had been happening behind the scenes. Uncle Garrett had been collecting evidence quietly for years, with the patience of someone who knows exactly when to play a hand. For 5 years, Cassie had maintained the narrative at every family gathering. She performed grief about me at Thanksgiving. She told cousins I had gotten into trouble she couldn't discuss. She told our grandmother, Nana Gloria, that she had tried to reconnect with me, and I had blocked her. She flipped the entire story, made herself the loyal sister who stayed, and made me the one who had chosen to leave. She didn't need my parents to hate me. She just needed them to believe I had abandoned them. That way, their silence felt justified, and she remained the only daughter who stayed. There was something else Garrett had uncovered. 2 years ago, someone using a fake name had contacted HR at UT Southwestern about my credentials and disciplinary record. The inquiry had been flagged as unusual and forwarded to me. I had assumed it was spam and filed it away. Garrett spent 4 months tracing it. The IP address came back to an apartment building in Houston, where Cassie had been living 2 years ago. When Jerome told me over our kitchen table at 11 at night, his voice was careful the way it gets when something genuinely troubles him. She wasn't trying to move on from the lie, Dee. She was trying to maintain it, actively. She was looking for anything she could use if the story ever started to crack. I sat with that. I deserved to know that, and I deserved to decide what to do with it. He was right, but life was already deciding for me. 3 days after the surgery, Cassie opened her eyes. Groggy, slow, still moving through the fog of medication, she blinked at the ceiling, at the IV pole. Then her eyes tracked to me, standing at the foot of her bed reviewing her chart. She squinted, read my batch, read it again. Every bit of color left her face. "Delia? Good morning, Cassandra. I'm your attending physician. You had a hemorrhagic stroke from a ruptured cerebral aneurysm. Surgery went well. You're going to make a full recovery." She stared at me, then at my badge. Then I watched it happen. The old reflex, the quick recalibration behind her eyes, the instinctive search for the angle. Even now, tubes in her arms, my sutures in her skull, she was still looking for the spin. "Delia, I can explain. The things I said to Mom and Dad. I was scared. I didn't think—" "You don't need to explain anything to me right now." I nodded toward the glass partition where my parents stood in the hallway, faces wrecked. "You need to explain it to them." I updated her chart and left without another word. I didn't stay to hear the conversation that followed, but the floor heard it. ICU walls are thin, and my sister has never learned how to be quiet when she is cornered. Uncle Garrett arrived at 10 that morning. He walked into Cassie's room while my parents were still there. He didn't sit down. He opened his phone. He had the email I sent my parents the day after the first phone call, with Dr. Anand's signature and the university registrar's seal. He had my doctoral graduation announcement. He had a photo of me at a university research showcase, my name listed under keynote speakers. And he had a text message from Cassie, sent to him 3 years ago. He read it aloud, voice flat. "Uncle G, please don't tell Roy and Viv about Dee's work at St. Caldwell. They've moved on. It would just open everything up again. Let sleeping dogs lie." The room went very quiet. Cassie looked at the ceiling. Mom looked at the phone, then at Cassie. You knew, Mom said. Her voice was hollow as wind through an empty room. You knew she was a doctor. You knew where she was. And you told us she had abandoned us. Mom, you told me she had stopped answering your calls, that she blamed us, that she chose to cut us off. Mom's voice was shaking now, something structural giving way. Is any of it true? Any single part? Garrett answered before Cassie could. She filed a formal leave of absence with full documentation. She called your house 14 times in 8 days. She sent 2 emails and a handwritten letter. You returned the letter unopened. Dad was sitting with his elbows on his knees and his head in his hands. Jerome walked me down the aisle, Mom said softly, not to anyone in the room. Jerome's father walked her down the aisle, and I wasn't there because Cassie told me. She stopped, put her hand over her mouth. Cassie stared at the ceiling and said nothing. There was nothing left to perform. The audience had seen the scaffolding. She lay there with my sutures in her skull and nowhere left to go. Dad walked to the window and stood with his back to the room. His shoulders moved. Garrett told me later that in 61 years, he had never seen his older brother cry, not at their mother's funeral, not once. He cried at that window, silently, facing the Dallas skyline. Nobody said another word. There was nothing left to say. I came back at the end of my shift. Mom stood up the moment I walked in. Her face was completely wrecked. Delia, I am so sorry. I don't know how to. I held up one hand. Gently. Firm. I hear you, and I believe you mean that. But sorry is where we start. It isn't where we land. I sat down across from her. Equal ground. I need you both to see a family counselor. Not for me, for yourselves. You need to understand how you arrived at a place where you blocked your daughter's number and returned her letters without reading them and never once called the university to check. Dad's jaw tightened. Old reflex. We don't really do that sort of. Dad, quietly, not harshly. Look where we are. He stopped. A long silence. Then he nodded, small, like it cost him something real. I looked at Cassie on the bed. She was watching me, stripped bare in a way I had never seen from her. When you're recovered, you and I will have a real conversation, but not today. Today, you're my patient, and I don't mix the two. I left, spine straight, measured steps. I did not look back. 2 weeks later, Cassie was discharged. I chose the meeting place, a coffee shop in Addison, equidistant from her apartment and my house. Jerome came and sat at a window table with briefs he was genuinely reviewing. He didn't look over once. Cassie walked in looking hollowed out. The confidence she used to wear like cologne was simply gone. She sat down, wrapped her hands around a cup she didn't drink from, stared at the table. I didn't preamble. I'm not going to list every lie. You know what you did. What I want to know is why. A long silence. Then, because you were about to have the life I told myself I deserved, and I didn't know how to be in the same family as that. I let that sit. That's the first honest thing you've said to me in 10 years. I'm sorry, Dee. I know, but sorry doesn't give me back the years. Sorry doesn't put Dad in the front row at my defense. Sorry doesn't unreturn that box of my high school things Mom mailed back like I was already dead to her. She looked away. Then, there's something else I need to tell you. Her voice dropped. I contacted the graduate school twice, your second year of doctoral work. I told them you had falsified your leave of absence documentation. I told them to investigate. The coffee shop hummed around us. They didn't act on it, she continued. Dr. Anand responded directly. They closed the inquiry within a week. I know, I said. I received notification at the time. I didn't know it was you until recently. Cassie closed her eyes. You were trying to take my degree, I said. Not an accusation, a fact. Yes. The word was barely a word. I leaned back and took one breath. Jerome, across the room, did not look up. Here is what happens now. You are going to write an email to every member of this family, every aunt, every uncle, every cousin, who spent 5 years thinking I was in some kind of trouble. You will tell them the truth, all of it, not a version, the truth. I held her gaze. Garrett will confirm delivery. Okay. And you will find a therapist, your own work, separate from whatever my parents do. Okay. I'm not removing you from my life, I said, but I'm setting the terms. Truth, accountability, and time. Not grand gestures, time. She didn't push, didn't perform, didn't look for the angle. That was new. I met my parents the following Saturday at their house in Beaumont. Same table where Dad had read my acceptance letter all those years ago. Same table where Cassie had smiled with just her mouth. I laid out the same terms: counseling, consistency, truth. Dad sat with his hands flat on the table and listened. When he finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I failed you. That's not a complicated sentence, and I'm not going to dress it up. I know, and I'm telling you there's a road forward if you want to take it, but I need you to understand something, Dad." I looked at him directly. You didn't just believe Cassie's lie. You preferred it because it was easier than asking hard questions about whether you had ever really seen me clearly. That's what the counseling needs to reach. He didn't argue. He didn't redirect. He just looked at me with the eyes of a man who had stopped running from something. I know, he said. I stood to leave. At the door, I turned back. One more thing. Garrett's father walked me down the aisle. That's a fact we all carry now. But if you want to know your grandchildren someday, you start showing up, not for milestones, for ordinary Sundays. That's where trust gets rebuilt. Mom covered her mouth. Dad nodded. I went back to the car. Jerome looked at me. How do you feel? Like I put something down that I've been carrying for a very long time, I said. He started the car. Cassie's email went out on a Thursday night. Garrett confirmed delivery to 29 family members. I read it Friday morning with coffee. 4 paragraphs. No flourish, no performance. She had fabricated evidence. She had sustained the lie for 5 years. She had contacted my graduate institution in an attempt to have my academic standing revoked. She had prevented our parents from learning the truth at multiple points. And I had never abandoned this family. I had been abandoned by it and rebuilt my life anyway. The last line, I am not asking for forgiveness. I am asking to be accountable. This is the least I owe her. The responses came over the following days. Aunt Beverly called Garrett in tears. Cousin Nathaniel sent Cassie a single text, I don't know how to look at you right now. And Nana Gloria, 87 years old, the family matriarch, called me directly on a Sunday afternoon. Her voice was thin, but entirely present. Delia Marie Harmon, I am 87 years old. I have never in my life been deceived so thoroughly by someone I raised to know better. Nana, don't you hush me. I let that girl's tears talk me out of using my own common sense, and that is a failure I will carry. A pause. Now tell me about your work. I want to understand what you do. I laughed. Genuinely. It's going to take a while to explain, Nana. I have time, she said. I've got nothing but time. No one organized a formal boycott of Cassie. No group texts declaring her an outcast. Nothing dramatic. But the trust she had spent 37 years accumulating, the reflexive assumption that whatever Cassie said was probably right, that was simply gone. You could feel it in the silence after her email, in the calls that didn't come, in the invitations extended but without warmth. No one punished her. They just stopped automatically believing her. And for someone who had built her entire identity on being believed, that was its own reckoning. 6 weeks after the surgery, I was nominated for St. Caldwell's Physician of Excellence Award. Dr. Osei had submitted my name the previous year and not told me. The ceremony was at a hotel ballroom in downtown Dallas. 200 people. Jerome sat at a front table, looking entirely at ease in a room full of physicians. Dr. Osei sat beside him with the faint, satisfied expression of a man who had been planning this evening for a long time. The MC announced my name. I walked to the podium. 5 years ago, I said, I came close to not finishing. Not because the work was beyond me, but because I had lost the people I thought I needed to hold me together. What I learned is that the people you need are not always the ones you were born to. Sometimes they are the ones who choose you, who sit in the hard seats and stay. I looked at Jerome, at Dr. Osei, at my team in the third row. Then I looked at the back of the room. Uncle Garrett had quietly arranged 2 seats in the last row. My parents. Mom in a dress she had clearly bought that week, hands folded in her lap, chin slightly lifted, trying not to cry. Dad in a tie he was visibly uncomfortable in, sitting up straight, looking at the stage with an expression I had never seen from him before. Not pride, exactly. Not yet. Something more honest than pride. Grief and recognition sitting side by side on the same face. And sometimes, I said, the ones you were born to find their way back. Late, but here. Mom put a hand over her mouth. Dad stood up. The applause thundered. After the ceremony, Dad found Jerome near the exit. He stood in front of my husband for a long moment. Then, I should have been the one. I should have walked her down that aisle. That was my place, and I was absent from it. Jerome looked at him with those steady, patient eyes. Yes, sir, he said. But you're here now. Dad shook it. He held on a moment longer than necessary. His eyes were red. I watched it from across the room and did not move toward them. That moment was theirs. 3 weeks ago, on a quiet Sunday in February, light snow drifting outside the kitchen window and not quite sticking, I was making breakfast when the doorbell rang. Mom and Dad on the porch, winter coats, Dad holding a bag from the bakery 2 towns over, the one where Mom had apparently gone at 7 in the morning because she remembered, from something I must have mentioned once 15 years ago, that I loved their cheese Danish. Hi, Mom said, careful and hopeful in equal measure. Come in, I said. Coffee's almost ready. Dad stepped into the kitchen and stood just inside the door, looking around the house he had never been in, the life that had happened entirely without them. He cleared his throat. Can I do anything? I looked at him, my father, 63 years old, standing in my kitchen for the first time, asking permission to be useful. You can set the table, I said. He went to the cabinet I pointed to, took out plates, counted them, looked at me. 4, I said. He set them down one by one, carefully, like he understood that ordinary things could be fragile if you weren't paying attention. Jerome handed him coffee. Mom stood beside me at the stove and hugged me without making a production of it. Arms around my shoulders, no words, just holding on. It wasn't the childhood I deserved. It wasn't the reconciliation that happens in the last 5 minutes of a movie. It was 4 plates on a kitchen table, snow falling outside, and cheese Danish warming in the oven. Imperfect, real, and real is more than I had for a very long time. My name is Dr. Delia Harmon. I am 33 years old. Cassie carries my work on her body, a scar on her skull, fading from red to silver over the coming year. Every morning when she combs her hair, she'll feel it. The mark left by the sister she spent 5 years trying to diminish. The sister who, when the moment came, chose the oath over the anger. I carry 5 years of silence somewhere between my ribs. It doesn't keep me up at night anymore. But it's there the way scar tissue is. You don't notice it until you press on it directly. We're even, in the strangest and most specific way 2 sisters can be even. And maybe, with enough real time, the unglamorous kind, the ordinary Sunday kind, we'll find our way to something that isn't even, something new. I didn't plan any of this. I didn't spend 5 years plotting a revelation. I didn't engineer a confrontation or maneuver Cassie onto a hospital table so I could stand over her with a badge on my chest. I just kept going. I did the work. I built the life. I let the truth be what it was, accurate and patient and completely uninterested in anyone's timeline. And the truth showed up exactly when it needed to. Not with drama, with a pager, on 9:47 on a Tuesday night, in a hospital corridor with fluorescent lights and the particular quiet of a building that never fully sleeps. The truth walked in wearing surgical scrubs and a name badge, and it didn't say a word that wasn't already written in 5 years of work. If you're sitting somewhere right now with your family's version of you in one hand and your actual self in the other, and they don't match, keep going. Build the life anyway. You don't need them to see you first. See yourself first. And when they finally turn around, and some of them will, let them find a door that you control. You decide when it opens. You decide how wide. You decide who walks through. That is not revenge. That is architecture. And it is, I promise you, more satisfying than anything else you could have built instead.